When I say local government, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Shout it out. Corruption. Any others? Slow, yes. What about innovation? No. We must think that innovation is where, or local government is where innovation goes to die. Is that fair? Well, I want you to think about this question as I tell you the story about one small town that decided to use ride-sharing to power its public transit system. So about 2 years ago, I was driving along one of our rural roads, and I saw this woman walking along on the dirt shoulder. And you know how your mind sometimes reminds you of things? I think I had seen her before, walking in the same direction around the same time. So this time I pulled over, and I said, "Would you like a ride?" And she said, "Yeah, I'd really appreciate that. I'm on my way to my local grocery store for my 4-hour shift." So I said, "Sure, hop in." Turns out Joanne does this 3 or 4 times a week. She can't drive because her car's broken down. She doesn't have a bike. And there's no local bus in town. So she walks 7 kilometers, 4 miles to work for her 4-hour shift and back again. Our town is about the size of Mississauga, so it's quite large, but it only has 36,000 people, so it's fairly spread out. When I got to work, I couldn't get Joanne's predicament out of my mind. How could we connect these cars that are whipping up and down our rural roads with the people that need to get from point A to point B? So I put a challenge to our team. I said, "Guys, gals, we got to do something about this. What can we do?" And of course, our first thought was, well, we'll reintroduce hitchhiking. It worked in the 60s. You can see the slogan, "Peace, love, and public transit." We sort of thought it maybe wasn't going to be the safest way of traveling. So then we kept doing some research and some brainstorming, and of course, we figured out that ride-sharing was already connecting the demand for a ride with the cars that were going in the same direction. So shortly after, the town of Innisfil, Ontario, Canada, launched what we understand to be a global first, a public transit system actually powered by Uber. We call it Innisfil Transit. Ta-da! So how does it work? Well, you take out your smartphone, you put in an address of where you want to go, and the app knows that you're within the town. So it actually gives you the Innisfil Transit option on your phone, really simple, ahead of the UberX. You click Confirm Innisfil Transit, you pay your $3 through your credit card or a prepaid Uber card, and you travel to your destination door to door in comfort and sometimes in style. Pretty simple, right? Then once a month, Uber sends us a bill, sends the town a bill, and the bill is our subsidy. So we write a check to Uber, and that's it. Pretty simple, eh? But when I talk to people about this, there's lots of concerns that come up. And people say, well, is it really better than traditional transit? So I want you to come on a journey with me, and let's compare the two systems. We're going to use this really sophisticated chart to keep track of which system is better based on the criteria that we apply, okay? Ready? All right, let's talk about affordability. So from a user perspective, in traditional transit, you'd pay sort of $2 to $3 to get around town. In Innisfil Transit, you pay $3 to $5 to go to our key destinations. Those are things like the library, the recreation center, and everywhere else, you get a $5 discount off the standard UberX price. So from an affordability perspective, I think Innisfil Transit is pretty close, but traditional transit probably still kind of gets the point there. From a convenience perspective, which one's better? Well, in traditional transit, you have service every 30 minutes or so. There's a limited number of routes. There's a couple of bus stops. You probably travel indirectly to get to where you want to go, right? Sometimes you have to transfer 1 or 2 times. Well, with Innisfil Transit, you have the power of transit in your pocket. On demand, real time. You wait about an average of less than 10 minutes for the car to show up to your door, and then you travel to your destination. Pretty convenient, right? It'd be hard to get more convenient, I think, than Innisfil Transit. What about from an accessibility perspective? Well, in traditional transit, hopefully you have a fully accessible bus that can accommodate all kinds of mobility challenges. In Innisfil Transit, the town partnered with a taxi company that actually has fully accessible vehicles. So you also get that accessibility from a mobility perspective. But accessibility is not only about physical challenges, it's also about how you access the system. So what happens if you don't have a smartphone? Well, in Innisfil Transit's case, you call the town, and the customer service department can book you a ride once you set up an account with them. So from an accessibility perspective, I think Innisfil Transit takes it as well. What about from a subsidy perspective? Well, in traditional transit, to have a north-south, east-west route with 2 buses, it was going to cost the town about $600,000 a year. In Innisfil Transit, the first-year subsidy was $150,000. Now, I got to take a little sidebar here. In government, we don't ask ourselves very often, what happens if we succeed beyond our wildest imagination? That is not something we talk about very often or consider. But in this case, think about this for a minute. We launched it. We're into our second year now. We have 7,500 rides happening every month. Next year, we're projecting 90,000 rides in Innisfil through Innisfil Transit. So our subsidy has grown. It's now $500,000, but it's still cheaper than traditional transit, but look at the system you get. What about data? This is always a concern, right, when we talk about public-private partnerships. Who owns the data? Where's the data? Where is it transferred to? So in traditional transit, small transit systems have limited data, especially limited data that you can do anything with in real time. With Innisfil Transit, we actually have what I like to call the power of Silicon Valley analytics with our friends at Uber. So they're doing fraud detection, they're responding to demands in real time so that we can deploy more vehicles if we need to, even coming in from outside of the municipality into Innisfil. To date, we've had 1,400 unique drivers working in Innisfil, in our small town. So from a data perspective, I think it's pretty cool, and Innisfil Transit gets that point too. What about from an environmental perspective? Well, look, there's no doubt that if you have a full bus, that's the most effective from an environmental perspective. The problem is, how many of you live in small towns where you see the bus going by and there's almost nobody in it? It's quite a common problem. So in Innisfil Transit, we encourage ride pooling. And this is where you actually share your ride with somebody else, not just the driver. Now, we're only at about 10% of our rides that are pooling right now, but we're working with Uber to try to increase that number. Because we think those kind of social collisions are actually really important. They help create in a small town sort of a get-to-know-your-neighbor kind of opportunity. Because you might not talk to somebody on a bus across the hallway, but you might talk to somebody who's sitting next to you in your Innisfil Transit ride. But overall, from an environmental perspective, let's call it even in our oversimplified discussion today. So what do you think? Overall, Innisfil Transit's not bad, eh? It's meeting our needs in the town, we think today, definitely better than traditional transit. So if that's true, how do we apply this thinking to other areas of local government? Well, I think it starts by trying to raise the bar of what we expect from government. What if we actually imagine government iterating and piloting and testing creative solutions? What if we expected innovation as a need to have in local government rather than a nice to have? Well, 3 things would have to happen, I think, to make this possible. The first is, ladies and gentlemen, we need to be more forgiving. The truth is, we live in a political environment today where if somebody makes a mistake, you might as well disconnect from social media for fear of the Twitterverse wrath that's going to come down on you. And it's probably 12 people, but it feels like a lot more. Innovation sometimes means failure. So we have to get comfortable with that. We have to fail fast and learn and forgive. Secondly, we need to do more research and development in government. The private sector does a really good job of this, but in government, we're still learning how to do it. And, innovation doesn't usually come from a lightning bolt idea. It usually is born out of really hard work with interdisciplinary minds working together to try to solve a difficult, intractable problem. That's not free. Third, and perhaps most complicated, is I think we need to reimagine the mission of local government. We've had the mission in local government of trying to be the best place to live, work, and play. It's a great goal, but it's hard to measure if you're succeeding. I think we actually have to reimagine what the mission looks like. To take one small example, what if our mission at local government looked more like the Tesla mission? Accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. Tesla's mission isn't, hey, make a nice car that's really good to go to work, home, and the soccer field with. It's actionable, it's bold, it actually improves quality of life. What if our local government's mission actually looked more like this? Accelerate local government's transition from delivering basic services to delivering tangible life improvements. If you think of the Innisfil Transit example, we were able to give people back time by dramatically reducing their travel time within the town. We were able to give them back money by having flat fees and capping the tax rate or the tax subsidy that would go into the system. We were also able to facilitate health by getting people to the doctor, getting people to the grocery store to have fresh food. Overall, we're hoping that we actually increased people's happiness. Maybe they were able to get to their lover, and didn't have another way. The truth is, if we use this kind of a mission for our local government, we expect them to give us back time and money and facilitate our health, our wellness, and our happiness. What would that look like? Let's make local government a place where innovation goes to thrive, not to die. Thank you.